Why didn't I know? Because I didn't know anything about cults or narcissists. So I didn't realise I was being manipulated by one. Not just me, but people in centres internationally. Sogyal Rinpoche was a major teacher in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. There'd been whispers about his behaviour over the last 4 decades, and nothing had ever come of it. Everybody who spoke up about their abuse at his hands was shamed, vilified. For us inside the cult, we were told that these people had mental issues, or that they had a vendetta against him, all sorts of things. My story is in a Buddhist context, but those of you who know about cults will recognise exactly the same things that relate to all cults. Now, your local Tibetan Buddhists would like to think they're above all of that, but they don't know anything about cults, and they don't realise how they are behaving in a cult fashion. The only thing I knew about cults was I thought, well, you know, they were people who all lived in around a guru and believed weird things. And I didn't even think like, oh, actually some of my group do live in. And I didn't think what it might be like for them, because a cult structure, you've got your boss, you've got the people in the inner circle, you've got the people just a little bit further out who work their asses off, and then on the edges you get your ordinary person who is just getting some benefit out of all the wise things that they're being told. And you know, from them it's a very different perspective to what's happening to someone in the centre of an organisation. And I remember him sitting up there and saying, you know, some people say we're a cult. We're not a cult, we're a religion. 2,500 years of religion behind us. And I went, yeah, we're not a cult, we're a religion. What did I know? Nothing. I didn't know anything. Okay, the other reason I didn't know as an occult was because I ignored the signs of abuse and corruption. Now, I didn't see people being hit. I didn't know about the sexual abuse, but there were signs and I ignored them. I did see people being emotionally abused. I did notice that the Lama had a lot of very young, very attractive girls around him. But we were told, well, he's not a monk and it's all consensual. And I thought, yeah, sure. Had I known a bit about cults, I might have looked into it a little bit closer. I might have, even if I'd thought about what consent actually really means, I would have realised there can be no consent in a situation where a guru is all-powerful and you are supposed to be completely obedient to him. And if you're not obedient, in Tibetan Buddhism, some people believe you'll go to hell. So where's the consent in that? But I didn't think like that, because I didn't know anything about cults. And I was getting a lot out of the teachings. I mean, Tibetan Buddhism is a long tradition. It has some wonderful teachings. That's why I was there. That's why we were all there. We were taught to meditate, and meditation's great. It's a really good skill to learn. So I wanted to learn this. And I heard teachings which were empowering, which were inspiring, and I wanted to know more. And so I ignored what was in front of my eyes. We also were subjected to a clever kind of brainwashing, which it took me a long while to actually name it as brainwashing, but it was. So how did I discover that I was actually in a cult? So Jack mentioned the letter written by 8 people, which was horrific. I read it with just like, my mind was completely blown. It detailed horrific emotional, physical and sexual abuse and financial abuse that Sogyal Rinpoche was dishing out to the people in his household, in the inner circle of the organisation. And the interesting thing was that when I read it, I didn't disbelieve it for a moment, because I recognised that it was only a matter of degree. I recognised that I had seen the outer form of this. I knew enough about this man that I realised that he was capable of everything that they told me. And also 2 of my friends were part of the letter, were letter writers, and I knew they wouldn't lie. So I immediately decided that I could no longer be his student, but I stayed with the organisation because I thought they'd do the right thing. Oh, I was so naive. I didn't realise I was in a cult. I thought that he and the group would apologise. I thought they'd realise how wrong it was, that they'd apologise. And the religion even has this confession practice to, clear away your bad karma. And I figured, well, this is what they teach, so this is what they'll do. They'll follow this confession and they'll look after the poor people who they have harmed. No, they didn't. It was actually how Rigpa reacted to the revelations of abuse that started to open my eyes. I realised fairly quickly that they were not concerned about benefiting their members. They weren't concerned about benefiting all beings, which is what they were supposed to be about. We were all supposed to be training to be bodhisattvas. We were supposed to be practicing love and compassion for all beings. It became very obvious very quickly that they were only concerned about protecting their organisation and keeping their income stream. This letter came out to all the people in the group. They sent it off to everyone in the group. It was like we all became aware of this at the same time. Some people ignored it, pretended it wasn't happening. Some people saw nothing wrong with it because the guru's perfect, and even if he beats you up, that's fine. People actually believe this still. But in the group that I set up, we talked about it and we shared information, and a lot of cult information began to come into the group. And at first, we didn't really want to believe. I remember Blair a couple of years earlier telling me I was in a cult. Eventually, I came to the point where I admitted he was right. But it took the cult literature. Reading that, I just went, oh dear, this is so embarrassingly familiar. And so I began to realise. So in what ways did Rigpa, this supposedly genuine Tibetan Buddhist community, in what ways were they like a cult? And to answer this, we first have to look at what's the difference between a religion and a cult. Not all Tibetan Buddhist groups are cults, but the system of beliefs that they have make it very, very easy for them to slide over into a cult. For instance, just the difference between a religion and a cult, if you look at markers of a cult, one of the things they often say is that you do a lot of chanting and you learn meditation. Well, that's part of Tibetan Buddhism. So, always when I saw that, I would go, oh yeah, well that doesn't apply. But of course, the chanting and the meditation is supposed to be for the benefit of the student. It's not supposed to be used as a method of control and manipulation. Margaret Singer, you probably have heard of her, cult expert, says the difference between cults and religions is that in religions the devotion goes to an abstract principle, whereas in a cult the devotion is to an individual. So in a Christian situation, that devotion is supposed to be to God, not to the leader of the group. In Tibetan Buddhism, this devotion is supposed to be to a teacher principle, which is visualized as a deity. And it ultimately points to our own teacher inside, our own wisdom. But even though we were taught that, in practice, in this group, the devotion was to Sogyal Rinpoche. And to progress through the cult to get the highest teachings, you had to display devotion. Not only have it, it was expected that you would actually show. We had to write stuff saying how devoted we were to him. And Margaret Singer also says, the mark of a destructive cult is that the follower turns over their decision-making and give complete obedience in return for having secrets revealed to them. And that was Rigpa to a T. We had the highest teachings dangled in front of us. This is the secret, this is the magic, this is what you all want. And they were great teachings, yes. It's not the problem of the teachings, it's the way they were used to manipulate us. It was the requirement of complete obedience that we had to have or were supposed to have, those teachings weren't given to just anyone. In Rigpa, the guru had absolute power and demanded devotion. These are the ways in which it matched a cult. The guru abused his students and saw nothing wrong with it. Also, certain beliefs enabled this abuse, so that you couldn't even say, well, that's wrong, because you were told that no, what you were seeing isn't abuse, it's love. This is where the brainwashing came in. I think one of the most painful things for someone who's come from a cult is recognising where you might have stepped over a normal line in your own personal integrity. And for me, that was sitting watching a woman be bullied, verbally abused for over an hour. She was in tears. She was completely traumatised. And I was sitting there and I remember looking at all the other people. And this was the special group. These were supposed to be the highest teachings we'd gathered to get. And this is what was actually happening. And I remember sitting there and it just suddenly occurred to me that no, he'd gone too far. This was bullying, this was abuse. And I looked at all the other people and they're sitting there like zombies. And I said to myself, no, this is wrong. This is completely stuffed. And I said to myself, I'm never coming back. And I snuck out of there. But I came back the next year. I came back the next year because all my friends were in the group. And I didn't stand up and say, hey, mate, what do you think you're doing? I was terrified he might turn it on me. But for me, someone who normally would speak up when I see any kind of injustice, that was enormously painful for me. And I realised then how I had been led through a process of being told that this man was a crazy wisdom guru and therefore his love came out in unconventional ways. But that everything that he did was for your benefit. So if he growled at you, it was to wake you up. I can see you're just like, yes, I know this. It's all the same. It's all the same things. And we would sit there and watch him verbally abuse someone. And we were told, just let it go. Notice your risings coming up, but don't pay them any attention. It's just stories. Don't go there, just let it go. And so we were being trained to be numb to our gut feelings. This is the brainwashing. And we'd already been sitting for, say, sometimes an hour or so in meditation. So we're wide open. We've practiced watching everything rise and just pass away. Meditation's great, but it can also be used to bypass issues. And that's what we were taught. Like, we got the right teachings, we got the right words, but practically speaking, we were taught to completely ignore the gut feeling that was telling us that what we were watching was wrong. We were actively taught that cruelty was love. And there's a logical sort of basis for this idea of wrathful compassion, it was called. For instance, if you're a mother and your kids playing by the road and they race off onto the road, you don't just go, oh, darling, sweetie, do come back. You scream at them. Get back here. Stop playing on the road. That's wrathful compassion. As a mother, I went, yeah, I can see that. But that's not what this guy was doing. No, he's a narcissist and he's just fulfilling his own needs and telling all of these people that it's okay because he's a guru. We weren't allowed to criticise the guru and we only ever heard good feedback. So we were encouraged to give feedback, and then the feedback was read out. They'd read out this really gushy stuff. Oh, it was so wonderful. I had this marvellous experience, Rinpoche, blah, blah, blah. But you never heard anything negative, even though I know people did put negative stuff in. So you weren't allowed to criticise. There was this sort of appearance made that, yeah, you could give any feedback you wanted, but anything negative was just ignored. Questions were discouraged. We weren't allowed to actually ask questions during a teachings. If anybody did, they got put on the spot and it was pretty embarrassing for them. You could write a question down and put it in, but it would get twisted and rewritten, and by the time if you were lucky enough that he did actually answer it, you didn't even recognise it as your question. And even then, mostly your questions never really got answered. So after a while, we just learnt not to ask questions. He manipulated his students by demanding complete obedience, dictating personal relationships for those close to him. So he would say who they could, and he'd use the word. He would change instructions on a whim. Someone would do exactly what he told them to do, and then he would change his instructions and then blame them for not doing what his new instruction was. So people could never get it right. They just never could. And then he would haul them up in front of everyone and make sure that everybody knew how stupid they'd been and what they'd done wrong. He overloaded people with information, all of us. We had action-packed, like we had so much in a retreat that you didn't have a lot of time to think. He demanded perfection. He would demand immediate attention to his needs. He fostered codependency, engaged in trauma bonding methods, so it would be abuse one moment and love bombing, excessive love displays the next. He showed disrespect for students. He constantly undermined them. He never allowed any individual decision making from his students, and he would have the students that he'd abused one day stand up in front of the group the next day and have them tell us how blessed they felt because of his attention. So that's all the ways that we were manipulated. The group is elitist. This is another common marker of cults. Rigpa probably still think they're the best Tibetan Buddhist group around. We all thought, we had it right. And there's no outside authority in Tibetan Buddhism anyway. The Dalai Lama is not like the Pope. Every single group in Tibetan Buddhism is their own separate little thing. There's no boss, right? So they can do pretty much what they like, and they won't criticise each other either. This is just a cultural thing. It's how it is. Those who left the group were, of course, never spoken of again, never engaged with. I invited some Rigpa people here tonight. Of course, they didn't come because I'm a Samaya breaker, and they're not allowed to rub shoulders with Samaya breakers. If they do, they'll go to hell along with me. So, all those beliefs. And I mean, in different groups, you just get similar kinds of beliefs, just cloaked in different language, but it's all the same. Critics, as I said before, were vilified. And there's this sort of idea that spiritual law is above worldly law. That if you're a great bodhisattva and you're hitting someone, supposedly for their benefit, then that's a higher law than the law of the land. Now that's a really, really dangerous thing, and it's probably one of the most, I think, major markers of a destructive cult. If a group thinks that their spiritual law supersedes the law of the land, you're in real trouble. I mean, that's when really bad things happen. Conformity to what we used to call laughingly the Rigpa party line, which I go into here in this book, was required in order to progress. There was a lot of rigidity in following rules. For instance, when I was instructing, I was not allowed to use my own words. I had to use Sogyal's words. So we all sounded the same. And then he would complain that none of his instructors had any personality. Transgressions were disciplined. He would have someone hauled up in front of, the whole retreat, and he would tell them what they'd done wrong, and he would get other people to stand up and say what they'd done wrong. There was a lot of fear about this public kind of humiliation. Nobody wants to be in that spot, so that tended to be a good method of control. Use of slogans, another cult marker. Some of the slogans that we had were really useful. For instance, visualise, don't conceptualise was one that we were told to use when we're planning an event. So instead of thinking about it, you actually visualize it. And that really, I find that really useful. And then you have things like it's just risings, let it go. Now, if you're being overwhelmed by your thoughts, in your busy day, that's great. It's really nice to just sort of go, okay, they're just thoughts, I'll just let them go. But when you're doing that with risings that are telling you that someone's behaving unethically, and you're also just letting those go, then it's a problem. And it's this twisting of something that's good into something used to manipulate and control people that I go into in great detail in section 2 of this book. It's all just your perception was another thing that we heard a lot of the time. And of course, when that came to the abuse issue, then this idea was used to say, oh, well, they weren't really abused, they just thought they were. And they misunderstood. They didn't realise that they were being blessed. So it was all the fault of the people who thought that they were abused. They got it wrong. In fact, many of the masters that supported Sogyal will talk about the students' misunderstanding. How can you misunderstand being abused? Well, you can if you don't think it's abuse, because you've been taught that it's not abuse, that you're really lucky that this guy's whacking you daily, often. So why did I ignore the signs? I think this is a really important thing. I ignored the signs because I wanted it to be real. I so desperately wanted a real spiritual teacher. And in the Tibetan tradition, this idea of finding your perfect teacher is it's a romantic idea. And, I just wanted that for myself. It's a lovely idea to give over all your concerns to somebody else. How lovely to just have somebody who's got all the answers. But I don't think anyone's got all the answers. So I had this romantic view of the religion as well. I thought it was the perfect religion. Because there was such a lot in it that was so good, I tended to think that all of it must be good. Hitting is obviously abuse. It's like emotional abuse is kind of harder to sort of pin down. At what point does someone yelling at you become abuse? And I would only see him for a couple of weeks every year. I wasn't with him every day. So, you might get a little bit concerned, like the story I told you before when I said I'm not coming back. But then you forget about it because there's so much good that you're getting out of it as well. So you just kind of push that away because it's uncomfortable anyway, and you really don't want to know about it. And then there's the codependency. My father died when I was in my 20s. It was nice, again, just to have this sort of daddy figure, and you want to believe that it's all good. And then there's a sense of community. And that's a very powerful thing that keeps people in cults, because you get a lot of friends there. And I felt I was really close to these people. But now they won't speak to me. I'm really lucky I left with a group of people, and I have some wonderful friends who left with me. Most people leave cults and they're all alone, and they have to say goodbye to all of them, and it's really, really hard. The fact that we were able to sort of wake up together and leave as a large group was really, really helpful for all of us. So how do you sort out the good from the bad? And I think this is it. This is an issue for any cult that is, part of actually a genuine religion that has genuinely valuable teachings for the students. And for me, I had to step completely out of the whole thing before I could do this. I had to reject the whole thing. I had to say, I'm not even a Buddhist anymore, let alone a Tibetan Buddhist. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. Only by rejecting it all could I then look back and go, all right, well, what did I learn that was valuable? I did learn to meditate, and that was valuable. I did also learn how meditation can be used to bypass your issues. I only learnt that afterwards, but, I have learnt that now. And I was able then to, by stepping right outside, I was then able to look back and see what were the beliefs that caused the problems, what were the beliefs that enabled this abuse. And in section 2 of the book, I look at these beliefs in great detail, and I look at how they were twisted. And that's the thing. There's a basis for all of these things. Like I said with the wrathful compassion, it's not a wrong idea in itself, but it was twisted. And even the idea of karma can be twisted and used wrongly. And that's what I saw in Rigpa. But the basic instructions, the basic meditation instructions that we learned, you know, they weren't made up. They did come from a long tradition. And we were lucky, I guess, that we did get the actual words of the teachings and that those weren't distorted. It was only the way it was put into practice that was distorted. So I think that's a necessary thing. It's part of your process of leaving a cult is to look back and see if there was anything good for you. And though there was good things for me, there wasn't for some of my friends. There really wasn't. So it's very different for different people. And we discovered this through our group that, you know, for some people they did get value out of it. Others, all they got was abused. It was very, very sad. So the next question is, Rigpa's still active in Australia. They're still putting out their glossy brochures. Their Facebook page is still active. What now? Can a cult stop being a cult? Rigpa say they've changed, and they have done some changes. They allow people to express diverse views. They say they're implementing the recommendations from the independent investigation that they set up because they had to in order to keep their charity status. But their implementations are half-hearted. They don't go the full way, and their words don't match their actions. Their communications have the same way of speaking as they always did, only talking about the good, always this back-patting, you know. We are so wonderful. Look at all the marvellous things that we do. They are being more thorough in how they train those who want the Vajrayana teachings, these special teachings, but, you know, all they're doing actually is making sure nobody misunderstands next time. They want you to understand so that when you get abused, you don't think it's abuse, you think it's the love of a great master. So what you say and what, as an ex-member, I know they'll be doing is two different things. Of course, Sogyal's no longer their leader. He resigned and went to Thailand. The people running the place, they can't think for themselves. They can't make decisions for themselves. He didn't let them. For decades, for 40 years, these people have been doing exactly what he's told them to do. And they have now new leaders. They have several advisors, spiritual advisors, but they all think exactly the same way as Sogyal did. They have given teachings and spoken up in a way that has vilified those who have spoken out, called them demons, Samaya breakers, said they'd go to hell, never once said anything remotely compassionate towards the victims. And these are the people who are the spiritual advisors of this group. They have not denounced the behaviour of Sogyal. They have never once said it was wrong. They have not taken responsibility for the harm that he caused or for their covering up, the organisation's covering up. They haven't even apologised, even though they said they have. What they've said is, oh, we're really sorry you feel this way. Not, well, we're sorry we did this, and this, and we're sorry we hurt you, but no, we're sorry you misunderstood. And the organisation said, we recognise that we did wrong and we didn't train you properly. If you're still in the organisation and you're still believing all of this, you don't see this gaslighting, you don't see it. You take it at face value and you believe it all. And of course, at the core of the organisation, those beliefs that enabled the abuse in the first place are still there. There's been no change. They haven't examined them. And even if they did, they're in no position, the people who run it, to step outside of the tradition and to do something that their spiritual advisors would think was wrong and actually say, you know what, guys, we got it wrong. We really seriously got it wrong. And we have to really change the way we interpret these beliefs, because there is a way that you can interpret those beliefs that aren't damaging. And it's actually the correct understanding. And I go into it again in this book, you know, backed up by a lot of research. But they're not willing to do that because their spiritual advisors are still spitting the same stuff. And the people who go to Rigpa have no idea. You know, you can pop down there for your little meditation session and sure, you won't be harmed. But that's only the first step. And by the time you get to the point where you want the Vajrayana teachings, you'll be so keen for them. Doesn't matter if they say to you, well, you know, it doesn't matter what the guru does to you, that's going to be for your benefit. You'll go, oh, that's fine, give me. Because that's how it happens. So this idea that they're going to give you a choice 4 or 5 years down the track after you've been in the organisation, that somehow you'll have a choice at that point. But only if you know about cults and how cults manipulate people and how they get them in, will you understand that. And so that brings me to say how wonderful the Cult Information and Family Support Network is, and how vitally important it is that we get this kind of information to as many people as possible. Because as you all know, cults are everywhere. And if we don't know how we're being manipulated, we just open for manipulation. So, that's it. Thank you. And I just want to say thank you so much to Roz for organising this for me.